Hello students, today I'll discuss the questions of the chapter Hearts and Hands by O Henry. The extract is, you'll excuse me for speaking, miss, but, I see you're acquainted with the marshal here. If you'll ask him to speak a word for me, when we get to the pen, he'll do it and it'll make things easier for me there. He's taking me to Leavenworth prison. It's 7 years for counterfeiting. So students, this extract is from page number 70 of the story Hearts and Hands of your book. Now this extract you have to read and there are some questions following it. So I have explained the chapter Hearts and Hands, and of course you know that there are the three characters, the Miss Fairchild, Mr. Easton and the glum-faced man. And I hope you remember that Miss Fairchild is an old acquaintance of Mr. Easton and the glum-faced man is the marshal. Now they all meet in the B&M Express, which is eastbound, and the two men, that is Mr. Easton and the glum-faced man who is the marshal, they board the train at Denver. Now I hope you remember also that the Mr. Marshall is a very compassionate man, and the glum-faced man who is the marshal is a very compassionate man, and he saves Mr. Easton from any embarrassment in front of his old acquaintance Miss Fairchild. So this passage is this extract is spoken to forestall Mr. Easton. This extract is spoken by Mr. Marshall to forestall Mr. Easton when the Miss Fairchild's face, the color of Miss Fairchild's face had gone, and she was in a bewildered horror when she saw the handcuff of Mr. Easton. So he speaks these lines. Now this extract, you'll excuse me, it has some questions. Now the first question is, please write in your notebook, to whom are these words addressed? What made the speaker say, in inverted comma, you'll excuse me for speaking, miss, but I see you are acquainted with the marshal here. So you'll excuse me for speaking, miss, inverted comma closed, question mark. Where were they at that moment? Now here you see, to whom are these words addressed? Now these words are addressed to Miss Fairchild. The answer is, these words are addressed to Miss Fairchild. Now who was an acquaintance of Mr. Easton? Now here, when Miss Fairchild notices that Mr. Easton was handcuffed to the glum-faced man, her expression of changed to one of the bewildered horror. And to prevent Miss Fairchild from knowing the truth of Mr. Easton, that he was the prisoner, he was the convict who will be spending 7 years of imprisonment in Leavenworth prison for counterfeiting, the glum-faced man intervenes. Now, therefore, he says these words, that you'll excuse me. That is, he asks Miss Fairchild to excuse him, that is the glum-faced man, to excuse him to intervene between the conversation going between Mr. Easton and Miss Fairchild. So, and utters these above lines. So, what is the question? Why does he, to whom are these words addressed, and what made the speaker say, you'll excuse me for speaking, miss? So here, now he wants to intervene and save Mr. Easton from any embarrassment in front of Miss Fairchild. Now where were they at that moment? At the moment, that is, they were in the B&M Express, which was eastbound. Now the second question, you see, how was the appearance of the speaker different from that of Easton? Now, then Mr. Easton, now you have to write in the answer. What is the question? How was the appearance of the speaker different from that of Easton? Now the first question was of 3 marks. This second question is also of 3 marks. Now here you have to describe the appearance of the speaker, that is the glum-faced man, and also the appearance of Mr. Easton, and this question carries 3 marks. Mr. Easton was a handsome man of bold, frank countenance. He was a proper man's picture. On the other hand, the glum-faced man was a ruffled, glum-faced man, heavily built and roughly dressed, who was actually the marshal and was taking Mr. Easton to the prison of Leavenworth prison for counterfeiting. Now the third question. Why has the glad look in Miss Fairchild's eyes slowly changed to a look of bewildered horror? Now this question is also carrying 3 marks. Now Miss Fairchild was speaking to her friend Mr. Easton. Now why does the glad look change? And she noticed that he was handcuffed to the glum-faced man. Now the glad look, the pink tinge on her face disappeared and it was completely changed into a bewildered horror. Why? As she thought that Mr. Easton must be involved in some kind of unlawful activity and therefore he is handcuffed. Now this answer or this question is also of 3 marks. Now students, remember that in ICSE you have to write very directly to the questions asked. 3 points, 3 marks. Now the fourth question. What does the speaker request Miss Fairchild to tell the marshal? Why? Now what does the speaker request Miss Fairchild to tell the marshal? Why? Now who is the speaker? Speaker is the glum-faced man. Now the glum-faced man, that is the speaker who had introduced himself as the convict, requests Miss Fairchild to tell Mr. Easton to say something about him. When they reached Leavenworth prison, the convict was being taken to Leavenworth prison for 7 years for counterfeiting, and Mr. Easton said something about him. So if Mr. Easton says something about him at the pen, means at the prison of Leavenworth prison, then there was a possibility that his sentence might be reduced. Did you follow? Now this question is also of 3 marks. Now the fifth question. Bring out the irony in this conversation. What opinion do you form of the character of the real marshal from the story? Now here, bring out the irony in this conversation. There are several instances of ironical statement in the story. So here in this extract, there is the irony. Very clear it is, you will understand. Now the speaker introduced himself as the convict to Miss Fairchild. Now he wanted her to think that he was being taken to Leavenworth prison by Mr. Easton, who was assumed to be the marshal. So she thought her friend Mr. Easton was the marshal. Now the thought never crossed her mind that marshals don't handcuff their right hand, because Mr. Easton's right hand, he was the prisoner and therefore his right hand was handcuffed to the officer, that is to the glum-faced man whose left hand was handcuffed with Mr. Easton. But she was not that intelligent that to understand this. So her idea of Mr. Easton did not let her think about him as a convict for even once. So this is the irony of in the extract. Now the second part of the question, what opinion do you form of the character of the real marshal from the story? So from the story, what you can say? That we can say that the marshal was a keen and shrewd observer. He could identify that Miss Fairchild's character in the conversation with Mr. Easton and Miss Fairchild, he could understand what kind of character was Miss Fairchild. He understands that Miss Fairchild was a woman who weighed social images more than the reality. And I had told you yesterday also that appearances actually versus reality in this story. Appearances are actually deceiving. It is deceiving, and therefore this Miss Fairchild did not understand the character of Mr. Easton. The marshal was also very understanding and of compassionate nature. He wanted to save Mr. Easton from the humiliation of being recognized as a convict in front of an old female acquaintance or friend. He was willing to lie for Mr. Easton, and this shows that the marshal would help anybody in distress. So, compassion is also the theme, as well as compassion of whose? The glum-faced man, as well as the appearance versus reality. So, students, these are the questions. Now, the last question is of 4 marks, carries 4 marks. So, students, write well and write what is asked. Read the question very nicely in the 15 minutes reading time and answer to the point. So, this is all about, and the rest of the chapter I hope you have understood very well. Thank you, students. And of course, don't forget to subscribe the channel, and if you like, you read the whole video, and please subscribe after reading it. Thank you.